Hey guys, this is the second part of our reliability and validity lecture series. So real quick, again, our chapter objectives, we are working on number 1 for this video. So we're going to talk about validity. So real quick, I went over this in my reliability video, but I want to go over it again. So the dependent variable is what we are measuring. So in the past video, in the reliability video, we talked about how what we are using to measure our outcome needs to be consistent. But in this video, we're going to focus on something a little different, okay? So in this video, we're going to focus on validity. Now, this one is basically accuracy. If a test is accurate, in other words, does it measure what it is supposed to be measuring? So this is absolutely critical because if we are using something that does not accurately measure our dependent variable, then everything we do from this point out is going to be complete junk in terms of statistics, okay? So for example, if you have an achievement test that is supposed to measure your knowledge of history, then you want it to be valid. You want it to be a valid measure of your knowledge of history. That's what it does. Now, there's 3 really common types of validity. We're going to go through these much like we did the types of reliability. So there's content-based, criterion-based, and construct-based. So these are all types of validity, but there are different situations when you want these to be present. So content validity is the most basic type of validity. This is whenever you want to know about factual knowledge. So my definition here is if a sample of items reflects the entire universe of items on a certain topic. So the items on your test should be chosen from some kind of framework of what should be on the test. This is why I provide you the chapter objectives for each chapter so that you know what should be learned over the course of the chapter. And in other words, what's going to be on the weekly quiz that I have. So for this week, for example, there's very few questions on this week's weekly quiz. So is that all of the questions that are possible to be asked about reliability and validity? It is not, but it is a very small sample of items. So hopefully what I've done is aligned those questions on that quiz to the chapter objectives so that I know my quiz has good content validity. I'm not going to ask you a question about like history on this week's quiz because that's not what we're learning right now. The next type is called criterion validity. So this is a little different. So content is based on factual knowledge. Criterion is a fancy word for basically skills or abilities. So if we have a test, we want to be able to predict that someone can perform some kind of skill either now or in the future. So for example, you can take the scores from that test that you've taken and use it with some other measure and see how it's related to that. So a common example of this is nursing boards and teacher certifications tests for this. So when you become a nurse, you have to take a nursing board. So it covers a variety of things, but it's all used to assess someone's ability to be a nurse, to draw blood, to take blood pressure, to measure heart rate, all the things that a nurse has to do. Same thing with the teacher certification exam. You want to know if someone can be a teacher depending on the grade level. There's a set of skills that teachers need to have. So my example here is if you have a test of culinary skills, it can be shown to be correlated with food reviews for chefs 2 years after they graduate culinary school. And so this is an example of predictive ability. So culinary skills, there's a lot of skills that chefs have to have. They have to know how to hold a knife. They have to know food safety. There's a whole bunch of things that go into being a chef. So if we look at scores on a test of culinary skills, theoretically, high scores on the culinary skills test should be correlated with high food reviews later. If they do, then we know we have a good test that has criterion-based validity. Now, the last type of validity is called construct-based validity. This one is more abstract. So when you want to know if a test measures some underlying psychological construct, so in past lectures, we've talked about some of these abstract psychological concepts. Some things are fairly obvious for dependent variables. Things like time or other easily measurable things. But when you have something like aggression or happiness, those are very abstract psychological constructs. They're not easily made into a number. So this is where construct validity comes into play, is when you want to know if a test measures something that is not easily made into a number. Okay, so for example, there's lots of tests out there about, aggression. Aggression was one of the concepts that we talked about too. So men who participate in body contact and physically dangerous sports score higher on a test of aggression. That's one example of something we can say. So here's the kind of big deal about this chapter with validity. If we can't establish that our test measures what it's supposed to, you got to have some backup plans. So one of those is to rewrite it. Some other options are to consult a content expert, look at the skills or abilities that you want to assess, or look at the rationale that underlies that test. So to kind of summarize the last two videos, this is going to be pretty fast. Validity measures what it's supposed to. So validity equals accuracy. Reliability is consistency. So it is consistent in measuring what it's designed to measure. A test can be reliable, but not valid. Okay, so a test can do something reliably, but it may not be measuring what you actually want it to. But if a test is valid, then it has to be reliable also. So validity is, I don't want to say more important, but validity is more critical to establish than reliability. So that I'm going to stop here. Check on to part 3 for my lecture videos for levels of measurement.